Welcome to the new Missile Age series. It consists of 4 parts. We are on part 2 of 4, the equation behind the next nuclear crisis. There's a number that decides whether a nuclear crisis stays a crisis or becomes something worse. It's not the number of warheads, it's not the number of missiles. It's a threshold, a point where a leader stops watching and starts striking. For 60 years, that threshold moved for one reason. Today, I want to show you the second reason and the actual equation behind it. Quick recap if you're just joining this series. In part 1, I laid out the informal version of this argument, that AI decision support doesn't need to touch a missile to make nuclear war more likely. It does it by compressing how much time a leader believes they have to think, and by encouraging them to trust a machine's read of a situation over their own judgment. Today we make that precise. Stick with me through the next few minutes. I promise the math is more intuitive than it looks on the page. Let's start with the classical picture. Imagine a decision maker weighing two options, strike first or wait and see. A few things matter to that choice. How likely do they think it is that the other side is actually launching an attack right now? Call that P. How bad is it if they wait and get hit? Call that L for loss. How bad is it if they strike first and it turns out there was no attack at all, a catastrophic false alarm? Call that C. And how much time do they have to figure out which one they're actually looking at? Call that tau, the Greek letter that shows up everywhere in this field to mean time available. The logic here is simple, even if the notation looks intimidating. Waiting is risky because you might get caught by something real. Striking is risky because you might be wrong. Somewhere in between, there's a threshold, a probability of attack, call it P star, above which striking first starts to look like the safer bet. Here's the formula. P star equals C divided by C plus the quantity 1 minus Q of tau times L. I know, that's a mouthful. Let me tell you what it means before I tell you why it's true. Q of tau is the odds that given tau amount of time, the decision maker correctly figures out whether an attack is real. More time generally means better odds. As tau grows, Q climbs toward 1, meaning given enough time, you can basically always tell a real attack from a false alarm. And when that happens, the formula say P star climbs toward 1. In plain English, with enough time to think, a leader will only strike when they are almost completely certain. That's what a stable world looks like. Now shrink tau. Less time means worse judgment Q falls, and when Q falls, P star falls too. A lower threshold, the leader will strike on weaker evidence. And notice, nothing about anyone's missiles changed. Only the clock did. That's the effect of time alone. But there's a second dial, and this is the part that's specific to AI. Call it beta, a number between 0 and 1 that captures how much a decision maker differs to a machine's assessment instead of their own judgment. At beta equals 0, they use all their time to think for themselves. At beta equals 1, they've essentially outsourced the judgment entirely, and extra time buys them nothing because they're not using it. Fold that into the model, and the effective quality of judgment becomes 1 minus beta times Q of tau instead of just Q of tau. The upshot, stated plainly, the more a leader differs to the machine, the weaker the evidence needed to trigger a strike. Same direction as time compression. And these two effects don't just add together, they compound. An organization that already leans heavily on automation gets hit harder by a given amount of time pressure than one that doesn't. Here's the part I find most interesting, and it's a little counterintuitive. Everything so far is one decision maker, reasoning alone. Real crises involve two sides. You'd hope that adding a second player might dilute the danger. It doesn't. If anything, it sharpens it. Here's why. A stable outcome needs both sides to believe the other's true attack probability sits below its own threshold. But if side A comes to believe that side B is operating under heavy time pressure, with a lot of automated decision making, meaning B's threshold is low, then A has to revise its own estimate of is B about to strike me upward. That pushes A closer to A's own threshold. B's compressed judgment becomes A's reason to abandon patience, and it runs both directions at once. I call this, and this is worth remembering, a reciprocal automation spiral. Each side, believing the other is speeding up, has an incentive to speed up its own response, just to avoid being outpaced. Both thresholds ratchet downward together. It's the crisis stability version of an arms race, except the currency here isn't warhead counts, it's reaction time. Now, a fair objection, this all assumes a perfectly rational, risk-neutral leader. Nobody actually believes real leaders work that way. Turns out it doesn't matter much. Swap in a more realistic model, a leader who's loss averse, who weighs the catastrophe of being caught flat-footed more heavily than the catastrophe of a false alarm, and the direction of the effect doesn't change. If anything, that kind of leader gets pushed toward an even lower threshold under time pressure, not a higher one. So here's where that leaves us. Two variables: how much time a decision maker believes they have, and how much they trust the machine over themselves, move the threshold for nuclear first use, independent of anything about the weapons themselves. And in a two-sided crisis, this doesn't cancel out, it compounds. Next time, in part 3, we leave the algebra behind completely and walk through the clearest real-world instance of this mechanism firing outside of a war game. The 2025 India-Pakistan crisis, reconstructed hour by hour. If you want the full written version of today's model, including the formal proof and the exact citations, it's linked below on Substack. See you in part 3.